So let's go on to gradients. These are all gradients. How can I prove they're gradients? Because I can use the color picker, change the color, and make really ugly stuff. Oh, this is going to be fun. Let me skip a few. Let me get rid of this. How do you know it's a gradient? Because when I change background size, I can make everyone go have epileptic seizures. That's cool. Star of David can be white. This is what my, I based this, yeah, that's perfect. When I first moved into my house, which was built in 1967 and never updated, the only thing they had changed in 40 years was they had replaced one of the toilets. And this was what the wallpaper looked like to me when I moved in. Because it had reflective wallpaper, like the this part right here, where it's where the white was, where it's white now is green, and where it's green it was actually reflective. You remember the? Have you ever walked into someone's house and you got like, seriously, come up to this millennium? That's what my house looked like. Anyway, so we have 4 types of gradients. We have linear gradients, repeating linear gradients, radial gradients, and repeating radial gradients. And we have 3 different syntaxes that we currently have to support. We have a very old syntax for WebKit, which is still what is required on older Android devices and older iPhones. And so the syntax is you tell it that you want a background image, because these are background images. They can be used any place where an image is used, not just for backgrounds, but for list styles, for border images, all that kind of stuff. The old syntax is you tell it you want it to be linear. You tell it where you want the start of your gradient to be and the end of your gradient to be, and then you give it color stops. So this code is on this example right here. So we can actually play with it if we want to. I'm just going to move the color stops over. And so what I did is I said I want it to be a linear gradient. This is the old syntax. So this is for older mobile devices. I want the linear gradient to go from up here to down there. And you're thinking, but wait, the line's going that way, right? Because the gradient is going from 25% opaque in the upper corner. It's changing from 25 to 50% opaque right here. It's going along this line. So you know when you do gradients and you change colors, it's actually 90 degrees, right? So that's what's happening. It's 90 degrees from that line. And then it's, I'm reading this, it's going from 0.5 to 0.5, so that's the 50% mark. It's changing from 25 opaque to 50% opaque, and then over the rest, it's becoming fully transparent. It's not very obvious, but we can change colors. We can make it 25 and 25, and we can make it 0. Okay, so from 0 to 25% mark, there is no background color, and then it's becoming 25% opaque. No, 50% opaque, going to 100% transparent. How do I know this? Because I'm reading it. This is where the color stop is. It's at the 25% mark. This is where the second color stop is, at the 25% mark. So from 0 to 25% to the full first color stop, it is solid, whatever this color is, and this is transparent. So why did I use this for transparent? Because let's show you what actually happens when you use the keyword transparent. Failing miserably at, they've changed. They have actually changed. Hold on a second. Gradients. Yeah. This is pretty exciting. I love it when I do a talk 1 week later and they've changed the stuff on me. I actually won't go through it because we don't have time. Okay, so remember when I said that some browsers will be supporting current color as transparent. This appears to have done so, because that's not going through gray. And I'm going to just check the older version of Chrome and see what happens there. It's gradients, actually. 404 in, that's always good when you put the wrong link in. Okay, here we are. And you see that it's not as pretty because that's going through gray. So new version of Chrome, we'll be using current color for transparent. Cool thing that I should be tweeting about, but you can beat me to it. So we now are supporting the unprefixed version in WebKit and almost all browsers, but a lot of older devices like this is still using. I updated last night, so I haven't tested yet. But yesterday it was still using the old version. So we have the second version, which is prefixed. So here we have either key terms or angles for our gradients. One thing I could have shown you here is I could have started at the 50% mark. And you could just do weird things. You basically told it where you wanted a gradient to start and end, right? In the new syntax, you don't actually tell it where you want it to start and end. You tell it what angle you want it to take. So you either want to go from top to bottom, bottom to top, left to right, right to left. Starts from the top left, stops from the top right, whatever, or a degree. So let's go over that. So here, here we have a gradient, and it goes from 270 degrees. This is prefixed, right? So this is the old syntax. So that's the same as doing top. Um, 270 degrees, or leaving it out completely, because the default is top. But if I were to do right, it would go in the other direction. So that's not that exciting. But the other thing to note is my color stops. Before, I use the key term color stop right here. We don't use the key term color stop anymore. Instead, we put the color and then what percent or pixels we want. Right now, it needs to be in this order. They're changing the syntax to be able to accept either order, that the color can go first or second. But that isn't supported yet, as far as I know, because they were just talking about it adding to the spec just last week. So here it goes from fully transparent to fully opaque white to fully transparent to fully opaque to fully transparent. You see, from left to right. That's all it does. It's not that exciting. So I change it to right, but I can also do 45 degrees, like that. But if I get rid of the prefix, it's not supported in this browser yet. If I go into this browser here, and hope for it to move over, take its time. Obviously, it's not going to support WebKit. Well, that's completely wrong syntax. That's the old one. Here, let's get rid of WebKit. See what happens. So 270 degrees is not the same as 270 degrees without the prefix. Because in the syntax between the current with prefix to the future, which is coming up now, like in the next few months without prefix, the angles have changed. So 0 degrees before, I'm just going to make this red. 0 degrees, 1, meant start from the left. 90 degrees meant start from the bottom. Now, 90 degrees means start from the left, and 0 degrees means starts from the bottom. So one's going clockwise, the other one's going counterclockwise. So that's the difference. So generally, I mean, it depends what your gradients are like. Just realize that when you know how like when you code, you write all of the prefix versions first, and then you do the non-prefix version last. Just realize when you do that non-prefix version that the angles are different. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's linear gradients. Let's go back to our prettier deck in our prettier browser. So the future is in the other direction, but there's one other thing. Remember when we were doing top before? Top does not work. Instead, we add the word to top. And that's just because the syntax was so well supported, and so many people put in the wrong prefixed version, the wrong unprefixed version, that they changed the syntax. So it's to. And then it has magical corners. If I say to bottom left, it actually goes from corner to corner. If I prefix that with moz and get rid of the to, you see how it's not bottom left. It's actually almost bottom left. It's bottom left if it was a square. It just basically, the gradient goes right through the middle. It basically turns the whole thing into a square and goes through the middle. That's not actually what it does, but that is the fastest way of explaining to it without giving you all of the trigonometry that none of us remember. So that is basically what I want to cover. Just one last slide here on gradients. Is 45 degrees is not the same as bottom left. Again, degrees will always be the exact same location. Bottom left will actually be corner to corner, if it was square. Okay. Do you guys want to play with gradients for a little bit? Let's play with gradients for a little bit. So let's go to this slide right here, which is slide number 29. And let's hope you can play with it. Yes, okay, cool. So what I've done is I've created color stops. So let's just go back a slide or two. So here I have no color stops. So it basically goes from red to orange to yellow to green to blue to purple, evenly distributed, with the last one being at 100% and the first one being at 0%. So from 0 to 20%, it changes from solid red to solid orange. From 20 to 40, because I know that because it divides it evenly. So you usually don't want to leave it up to chance. You usually actually want to declare what you want. But let's say we had used 90% for purple instead of 80. What happens here is at the 90% mark, since it's the last color stop, from 90% on, it's solid, that color. So this is solid. So color stops, two things to know about color stops. One, it says where that color should be changing over. And two, if you don't have a value of 0, like let's say we did 19% or 18% here, from 0 to your first color stop, it will be that first color stop in a solid color. Same thing for the end, for the last one. Now here, I just gave one value, 20, 40, 60, 80. So there's actually a gradient between those colors. However, I can make these hard color stops. You see the difference between this yellow and that yellow? By saying from 0 to 20%, I want it to be solid red. And from 20% to 40%, I want it to be orange. And by giving the exact same values, color stops, to two color values, I'm making a hard stop because it's changing. There is a gradient over 0 pixels. So you don't see any gradient because it has no room to. So that is, so play with this just for a minute so you get an understanding of how to write a color stop. And then we'll move on in a second. By the way, I love your Nyan Cat sticker. That's awesome. Okay, so that was also simple linear gradients. We also have repeating linear gradients. So Here I've been using percentages, but I could have also used pixels. Okay, and pixels. Oops. Okay, so the problem with that is there. Now you can see it. Problem with that is I probably would have wanted to use a background size and make it repeat if I was doing that, right? And that's actually how I made all those designs, but I'll show you those designs in a little bit. So we have repeating linear gradients, and repeating linear gradients you actually do want to use pixels, because if you were to use percentages, it would actually be percentage of the whole div, so it wouldn't be repeating. So you want to use pixels, and then notice that you see purple because it says purple 100 to 120, and it doesn't keep going. It just ends and it starts again from to red. You see that? It goes right from purple to red. This is why I'm not a designer. That is like this right there. That is like with the goldenrod background. That is incredibly hideous. I'm actually impressed with that because that takes talent. So you can just change the angle and we're all good, you know? Wow. Luckily I didn't do acid in the 60s because I wasn't alive. Okay, center gradient. I have no clue what this, oh, endpoints. From 0 to 40%, it's ugly, and I'm just going to go on. Well, I already talked about this. So stripes with background size. This was the hard way that we used to do things before we had repeating linear gradients. We used to actually make a div, and you can see where it breaks if I do this. You see that? So the only angle that worked, like you had to do the math to figure out what angle you needed to do to make it work correctly. And the background size was 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Actually, if I do no repeat, will that work? Yeah, so it was just this little box repeated. And it was, I don't think this is going to work. Oh, it does work. And it's animated. That's kind of cool. Like, what was I thinking when I was doing this? I'm having way too much fun. Okay. So that's actually kind of impressive. So this is how we used to do them. Luckily with repeating, we don't need to do it anymore. It just repeats for us. But when we were doing that kind of stuff, we came up with other tricks, like making tablecloths. And so all this is it's a background image repeated in two directions. So I have two gradients separated by a comma. Because just like you can have multiple background images, a gradient is just a background image. So you can have many of these, right? So I just made one going left to right and one top to bottom. That's it. Okay, tips on gradients. Vendor prefix them still, but when you include the unprefixed one at the end, remember the issue with the angles being in a different direction. The keyword transparent in some browsers still fades to gray, but we're getting rid of that. You can create multiple effects by adding multiple gradients. I'm going to show you my little gradients library. You already saw most of these. If this comes up, there it is. So you already saw these and those, but you didn't see these. You saw the disco ball. I just wanted to show you my favorite. Candy buttons. And these really look like cherries and not apples, but that's neither here nor there. And then never repeating and little hearts. And this is actually how to break. Remember someone said, can you crash a browser? Yes. So this is a radial gradient, and I animated it. And the thing with animation is you want it to be 60 frames per second. So you want it to render in less than 16 milliseconds. And rendering radial gradients, it has to measure every single pixel because your linear gradients end, right? They're just a line, goes from point A to point B, and that's it. And then it's repeated. Radial gradients is like, okay, here's the center, go out, I don't know how far, then it really shades out, and it just can get very big. So I crashed a browser with that. Then we have little dots, and then I really want to do something with my jail cell, because that totally looks like a jail cell. I want to like have like a little button where you can just add this on top of pictures and make people look like they're in jail. Polka dots, and this is all radial gradients. So let's just want to show you what you could do.